Welcome to the fourth and final week of Life Together. Life Together is a 4-week missional community teaching series on Christian community from Orchard Church. Today, in week 4, we are going to put a bow on it, so to speak, and understand how the lessons and discussion from the first 3 weeks of the series fit within the greater vision for community at Orchard Church. As a bit of a review, during week 1, we defined a Christian community and then identified and understood how we might overcome some of the barriers to engaging in community in a healthy way, namely busyness and other priorities, social anxiety, or trust issues. During week 2, we took a look at the early church that started in Acts chapter 2, understanding how this ancient way of doing church provides us with a model for engaging in church in a healthy and transformative way in our modern time. Then, during week 3, we took a look at our families of origin, understanding how the biblical definition of family, that is going back 3 to 4 generations, has an impact on our spiritual formation and engagement in Christian community today. Then, we did the hard but important work of looking at our family tree through the exercise of completing a genogram. All of this to understand who we are is affected and impacted by where we came from, and of course, how we would engage with our own spiritual formation and engaging with others in the family of God. But today, we are going to put all that together and take a look forward. We are going to unpack the vision as to how where you are right now in a missional community fits within the greater vision of how we want to engage community for you and as a church going forward. So, let's take a look at a vision for community at Orchard Church. Have you ever tried to grow a plant? It's kind of an odd question, isn't it? Especially if you are someone who considered yourself to be a gardener. You would say that's actually kind of a complicated question because it would depend a lot on what kind of plant I was talking about. You would know that there are certain plants that are classified as perennials. Those are plants that, in the right conditions and with a limited amount of intervention by you, come back on their own each and every growing season. But then there are plants that are classified as annuals. Those are plants that take very specific conditions and in some cases a great deal of care to grow and to thrive. It's the reason why certain flowers can't be planted outdoors until after the last frost, or why certain fruiting trees or vegetables can't be planted in the ground until it reaches a certain temperature. Even if you're somebody who honestly could not care less about any of this gardening stuff, you'd rather go to the grocery store and buy your fruits and vegetables there, and you'd rather admire somebody else's flowers and trees in their own yard, you would understand that plants do not grow and thrive unless they are in the right soil, the right conditions, and have the right amount of care. It's the reason why, for example, that we don't see palm trees here in Wisconsin. You couldn't just go to Southern California or to Florida, buy a palm tree and plant it in the ground here in the Midwest. Because eventually, because of the conditions and the soil and the climate, that tree would wither away and die after a certain amount of time. When Jesus was on earth, teaching and ministering, he was immersed amongst a group of people who understood the life cycle of the plant a great deal. Though not everybody was a farmer or a gardener, everybody would have relied on the earth for life and for sustenance. It's why Jesus often taught using the imagery in his parables of fruit or vines or the harvest. So when we think about John chapter 15 and Jesus talking about the vine, here, of course, the gardener being the Father and he being the vine, The hearer of that lesson or that teaching would have understood a great deal what Jesus was talking about. In John 15 specifically, Jesus talks about abiding in him, abiding in the vine. That's Jesus. And only when a person does that can they grow and thrive and bear much fruit. As we were discerning the vision for Orchard Church, this scripture and Jesus' teachings in John 15 stood out a great deal to us. In a time of prayer with a trusted leader in our lives, the Lord gave us a word to take the vision much further. In the time of prayer, we were brought back to Jesus' teaching in John 15 about the vine and the fruit. But the Lord said something more. He said, the fruit of a tree is not just the fruit itself, but it's an orchard. The vision for Orchard Church is one that is based in abiding in Jesus for health. This is similar to why healthy plants grow. It depends on the soil and the conditions and the care. So when we talk about planting a new church, we understand that it's specifically based on where we are, who we are, and how we abide in Jesus to thrive. But he also gave us a vision about if we do that, about the multiplication that we can see in Orchard Church and in its people, of taking the fruit that is born from abiding in Jesus, planting it back in the ground, and seeing a movement of multiplication that looks like an orchard. So today, we are sharing the vision for community and multiplication at Orchard Church. As we share this video today, you're going to see a diagram that comes up on your screen a couple different times to understand how this network of community abiding in Jesus works together in the vision that God has given us. The primary center of this movement, that is Orchard Church, is going to be around what we're calling missional communities. Missional communities are up to 12 to 15 people who do life together in some way, whether it be around where they live, work, or play, or also around the shared mission that they have for some aspect or group of people. It could be, for example, a group of people who are focused on serving and loving on foster families or foster parents. But ultimately, at the end of the day, missional communities are a group of people that, whenever possible, share a meal together. They hear a teaching from the Bible and apply it to their everyday life. And then they share in life together, praying for one another and growing together and healing together. Ultimately, though, we think it's important to share in the vision and the leadership of Orchard Church with other people. So though at some level we're accountable to a group of elders in our denomination, we think it's critical that we share in the leadership of Orchard Church with others. And so our vision, as you'll see on the screen, in a shared leadership, or what we're calling a polycentric leadership model, is that the leaders of each individual missional community within a network will share in shaping the direction of Orchard Church, as in what we will study, the communities in which we will reach, how we will serve other people, and how we will grow together. We think it's important that not one person holds the authority of making all the decisions for others, but instead that God will bring us a group of leaders that will help shape the direction of Orchard Church. We also believe that within that network, now it's important here to maybe talk about the place that we've discerned. The first place that we've discerned for Orchard Church is East Madison, and so we think it's important that the missional communities will grow and thrive around the place of Madison in Dane County. And so while it's critical to grow in missional community led by a shared group of leaders, we think it's important to see the greater community of Orchard Church. And so beginning in 2024, we will begin to have a weekly worship gathering where the missional communities within a reasonable distance from this location of East Madison will come together on a weekly basis. We think the scriptures provide us with a direction to meet together, to worship, to share in the Lord's Supper together, and to be formed under teaching and vision of the church. And so we will do that starting in 2024 in a weekly gathering. And so the missional communities will flow in and out of this space, this weekly gathering. But we also believe that in the place that God has first called us to, East Madison, that we'll reach people through that weekly gathering. And so think about this as an in and out flow between the weekly gathering and the network of missional communities. If people come into the weekly gathering and they haven't yet connected a missional community, we will work to do that, to plug them into community with others. And so we will grow within the framework of missional communities flowing in and out of a weekly gathering. Another important part of Orchard Church is this idea of vocation. Theologian N.T. Wright writes that although many believe that when we are glorified, it is a future event, meaning that followers of Jesus will be brought into fullness when Jesus returns again. We think it's important at Orchard Church that we don't look at this idea of our relationship with Jesus all being about something that happens in the future. The church is often taught that to be saved is to go to heaven in the future, and we think it's a beautiful image to think about where we will go and spend eternity. But many, including theologian N.T. Wright, believe that there is a certain vocation that happens when a person is justified or comes into relationship with Jesus now. And that is a core tenet of our vision for Orchard Church. We believe that each person that we will come into contact with and come into the community of Orchard Church has a certain wiring, a certain amount of gifting, and a vocation for their life that will help usher in God's kingdom now. And so in community, in missional communities, and in the shared gathering, we will discern how God has wired each person, and then send them out to the vocation of the work of being a Christian. You see, Adam and Eve were given a job in the Garden of Eden in the beginning of the book of Genesis. And though through sin they lost that vocation, that is caring for the earth, we think God has given each follower of Jesus a certain vocation to help usher in his kingdom and reconcile his creation now. And so to help us achieve this vision of multiplying, of planting an orchard, that begins with each person. And through seeking after the way God has wired and gifted you, we think we can see that orchard be planted through the people that we'll call Orchard Church home. In some cases, this might be something very simple, like a running club. Maybe you start a Christian running club if you have a passion for running. It could be starting a new Christian business, or even planting an autonomous church. Ultimately, we believe that while community is critical in formation and in healing of each individual, that we should not stay within that circle statically, that we are called to multiply, to see God's kingdom come in and through each of us in the places that we live, that we work, and that we play. And so you'll see in the diagram that individuals will be flowing out of the network of missional communities, fulfilling their vocation as followers of Jesus in unique ways. But ultimately, through the shared network of Orchard Church, or the individuals that are sent out and called out of missional communities for their vocation, that we are called to multiply through autonomous church plants or other kingdom ventures. In fact, we have made the commitment to multiply ourselves, that is, to send out 3 individual expressions of a new church or a kingdom venture or business in the first 3 years. We are allocating a certain percentage of our budget to do just that. And so, though we will gather and we will grow together and we will heal together and we will be formed together and we will serve our communities and our neighbors together, ultimately, we see the vision that God has given us for something more, for an orchard of fruit-bearing trees of healthy people and churches abiding in Jesus, for formation, for growth, and for multiplication. And so when you see this diagram of the network of Orchard Church, it can be a little bit overwhelming. It's a big vision, and we believe that God will help us to achieve it because he has called us to it. But ultimately, it's about you. It's about you being in community with other people in a missional community, coming together on a regular basis both in your missional community, but also in a shared worship gathering, to see the greater community of God's kingdom here at work in East Madison and beyond. And then discovering the unique ways that God has gifted you for vocation through your family, your neighbors, and the people that God has already put in your life. Ultimately, to multiply the kingdom, to see this network multiply over time. But at the end of the day, it's all about us. As individuals, planting ourselves in healthy soil, being tended to by the gardener that is the Father, and abiding in Jesus. And we believe that when we do that, we will be formed into the likeness of Jesus, healed in community with others, and called to the vocation that God has given each one of us. And so Orchard Church is a big vision of community multiplying together. And we invite you to step in, to discover how God has wired you, and to step into the next. The unique mission of Orchard Church is to lead people to abide in Jesus, to grow in relationships with God and others, and to multiply the kingdom. We invite you to join us in seeing the orchard be planted here and beyond. In just a moment, this week's missional community discussion questions are going to appear on your screen. So, as you're accustomed to, take a moment when you see them come up to pause the video, consider each question, and jot down or type down some answers that will allow you to join in the conversation in your missional community in the upcoming week. Thank you for joining us for the fourth and final video of our Life Together teaching series. Over these past 5 weeks, the 4 videos and the discussion around the family genogram, we have taken a look at community through the lens of the individual's engagement with it, through the expression of the church or the family of God, through your family of origin, and ultimately through how all of that fits within the unique and specific vision for Orchard Church. We hope that you have now a better understanding of the importance of engaging in this kind of community, about who you are in Jesus, in and through your family of origin, and in relationship with the family of God. And we hope that you've also begun to consider how God has uniquely wired you individually for kingdom vocation. We're excited to continue to walk alongside of you because community flows in and through all that we are going to be called to do as a church. And so community is critical and it's important. And we believe in and through it, you can be formed in and through the likeness of Jesus, in community with others, and be called out to more. And we're excited to walk alongside of you in that journey. So thanks so much again for joining us. Have a wonderful week. Grace and peace be with you, friends.